Vladimir Putin has ruled Russia for more than 2 decades. He's built a regime that's as powerful as it is brittle. Dictatorships rarely survive their architects. Today, we face the question that every Russian dreads. One that could reshape not just Russia, but global stability. What happens after Putin? I'm Elvira Bary, a writer born in the USSR, and in this video, I'll break down exactly what might happen when Putin inevitably leaves power. We'll uncover who might succeed him, whether Russia could fracture or rise anew, and how it might impact the rest of the world. Under communism, Russia had a clear, if delusional, vision of the future. Today, that vision has all but vanished. Modern Russia lives entirely in the past. As for the future, the only consensus is that it will be hard, possibly violent. And here's the core contradiction that no one seems able to resolve. Peaceful development and good relations with the outside world are fundamentally incompatible with the idea of empire. And yet empire for many Russian patriots is the ultimate value, the sacred pillar of their national identity. Peace and empire don't mix. One demands pragmatism, the other demands war. This dilemma is made worse by a deeply ingrained historical fear of conquest. The logic goes, if we are not an empire, we'll be devoured. After all, the West has always fought Russia, so it must be planning to do so again. From this mindset comes a belief. We have no choice. We must be an empire. And that means living hard, tense, and most likely not for long. It's not a future anyone wants to think about. So the future becomes a blank space, a white fog. And when people lose a vision of the future, they stop planning. They stop building. They just float alone in history's current, trying to survive. So why is the idea of empire so precious, even when it brings no personal benefit? Most Russians have never had real control over their fate. That powerlessness runs deep, and yet in every human being lives an ancient need to be respected by their tribe. If that respect doesn't come from real life, many Russians seek it through national pride. If I am invisible, at least my country is mighty. If my life is hard, at least Russia strikes fear and awe. It's a kind of boring self-worth, and it cuts across all social classes. Take, for example, a woman in a Siberian village. She's poor, but she beams with pride when she sees Russia's international success on television. Or take a television producer from Crimea, smart, articulate, passionate about Russian culture. He rages against Ukrainian cities for removing monuments to Russian rioters, blaming it not on Russian bombs, but on Ukrainian Nazism. Meanwhile, he ignores the fact that nearly every living icon of Russian culture, Akonin, Shulman, hundreds more, has fled the country. Putin is destroying Russian culture here and now. But the producer can't oppose him, so he fights a symbolic war instead, defending not the living, but the ghosts of Pushkin and Tolstoy. For many, the breakup of Russia feels like personal collapse, because it threatens the only source of self-respect they have left. The assumption is that if the empire falls, everything will be up for grabs. Land, industry, resources, with chaos sure to follow. So people make peace with injustice. Yes, the elites hoard the wealth. Yes, Putin jails his enemies. But if it's not me in jail, then fine. And besides, for many, Putin's rule does not feel like a nightmare. The market economy still functions. Social mobility still exists. Big scraps still fall from the master's table. For the energetic and well-educated, there are still plenty of opportunities. So why think about the future? And yet, it is coming. And pretending it doesn't exist won't stop it. Dictatorship has one built-in flaw. To stay in power, you must destroy anyone who could replace you. While you are young, this does not seem urgent, but aging comes fast, and suddenly there is no one left to take over. Or worse, you die before even naming a backup. Either way, the outcome is the same. If you are destroyed your country's political life, chaos will follow. The only question is how bad it gets. Some argue that strong men are what hold fragile nations together. Look what happened when Saddam was hanged, they say. Or when Gaddafi was killed, everything fell apart. But that's not quite the truth. The chaos does not come because the dictator is removed. It comes because he stayed in power for too long. He hollowed out institutions. He crushed civil society. He made sure no legitimate successor could emerge. So when the vacuum finally appears, it gets filled by opportunists, often violent ones. Dictators surround themselves with people who are no threat to them. They are too weak, too incompetent, or too ridiculous to rise on their own. That's why a dictator's inner circle so often resembles a circus sideshow. None of them have real political capital or national legitimacy. They all want the throne, and none of them deserve it. Putin never named a successor to avoid creating a rival. When he's gone, elites will battle behind closed doors. The most likely successor in the short term is someone just like Putin, or worse, a militant nationalist, an anti-Western hardliner. Expect harsher crackdowns, no reform, and a continued war in Ukraine. There's fear of a nightmare scenario, an outright tyrant ruling through terror, but pushing further than Putin could break the system entirely. Russia's elite doesn't want North Korea. They want Dubai, Paris, and Western luxury. And hardline isolationism ruins all of that. In a better scenario, Putin's exit opens a narrow window for reform. Here, a technocratic successor, someone pragmatic and managerial, might emerge. Technocrats gained credibility during COVID and the war economy's logistical pivot. These are the polished professionals, the central bankers, the mayors, the economic advisors. They avoid political statements, steer clear of war rhetoric, and focus on efficiency and modernization. They don't believe in sacrifice or destiny. They believe in keeping the machine running. They don't love Putin, but they fear chaos even more. So they serve quietly, keeping their heads down, hoping that one day they'll be allowed to step in as the adults in the room. A technocrat might usher in normalization. Fewer crackdowns, some reforms, maybe a nod to past abuses. But don't expect democracy. The goal would be stability, not freedom. But there's one big problem. Technocrats don't control guns. If a man with a rifle wants a piece of the pie, they can't stop him. And many of those men with guns don't share their calm, pragmatic worldview. The most dramatic possibility is political collapse, the breakdown of central authority to the point where Russia's state order begins to unravel. While often discussed in Western media, there are no clear signs pointing to this outcome. Still, the war in Ukraine and Russia's growing internal crisis have made once unthinkable scenarios slightly more plausible. Let's look at the fractures hiding just beneath the surface. For these scenarios to materialize, Russia would likely need to suffer a series of major shocks, either economic failure or a military breakdown, or both. The current regime is built not just on repression, but on mythology and mysticism. I explain this in depth in another video. One of its most important psychological pillars is the belief in the state's invincibility. People don't resist the regime because they believe resistance is futile. The logic is simple. The state is too strong, so the only way to survive is to align with it. But that logic can unravel fast if the state starts to visibly fail, especially if it can't meet its basic obligations. Paying government salaries, controlling crime and migration, managing inflation, Right now, prices are rising, but so are wages, so public pain is muted, keeping essential infrastructure working, particularly heat and water in winter. A major public utility failure in a remote city wouldn't threaten the regime, but in Moscow or St. Petersburg, such a failure would be seen as proof that the government has lost control. If protests break out and the government still has money to fund police and security forces, the outcome may resemble Belarus in 2020: brutal crackdowns and temporary suppression. But if the government runs out of cash or the security apparatus fractures, things could spiral toward revolution. Still, we must remember the Kremlin will cut healthcare and education budgets long before it touches the security services. The regime's survival depends on riot police, not school teachers. Another option is a mutiny within the military. The public wouldn't rise to defend the Kremlin. They've learned over decades to stay silent and wait for the dust to settle. The real question is this: could a charismatic military figure emerge to lead a rebellion? So far, Putin has made sure the answer is no. He systematically removed any general who showed signs of popularity or independent thinking. Even if a mutiny does happen, it would almost certainly lack a coherent ideology or economic plan. Why? Because these men were trained to fight, not to govern. They have no political education, no experience in civil leadership. They are not reformers, they are soldiers. The aftermath would likely resemble the Greek junta of the late 1960s and early 70s. Brutal repression, deep instability, capital flight, and mass immigration. But don't expect Russia's opposition to step in and provide structure or support. These two groups, the military and the liberal opposition, live in completely separate worlds. The military feels abandoned, ignored by the state, despised by the public, and silenced by law that criminalize any criticism of the war. But most opposition leaders view soldiers not as victims, but as executioners of the regime. They refuse to engage. Anyone who dares to say soldiers are human too risks being instantly cancelled and losing their entire audience. But set emotion aside for a moment. Let's ask the hard question: what would actually work? The answer is uncomfortable but clear: cooperation with the military. Not blind endorsement, strategic engagement. Listening, understanding their grievances, and fighting shared interests. Because without the military, the opposition is full of heart, but completely powerless. Let's be clear about a few things we shouldn't expect. Will Russia become a democracy after Putin? No. And not because Russians are not ready, but because there are no functioning institutions, no experienced leaders, and no public consensus about what democracy even means. The word democracy in Russia is tainted. It's associated with the chaos of the 1990s, crime, poverty, and lawlessness. Of course, that wasn't real democracy. But you can't go around arguing with every taxi driver and grandmother to explain the difference. Perception is everything. Don't expect nuclear war. Despite all the nuclear saber rattling in Russian media, nobody in their ruling elite wants to die in a bunker. Russian officials threaten nuclear apocalypse not because they are suicidal fanatics, but because it's fun to watch the West panic. Just read former President Dmitry Medvedev's Telegram posts. He regularly jokes about nuking London or New York. But in truth, Russian elite loves wealth and comfort. Putin himself is a hedonist. He enjoys luxury interiors, designer clothes, and elite vacations. He surrounds himself with animals and longevity experts, not doomsday cultists. These people want the world to recognize their feudal control over Russia. Leave them alone, stop asking where their money came from, and let them live like emperors. They don't want to burn the world down. They just want to blackmail it. Despite widespread fears of Russia's fragmentation, a full breakup is highly unlikely. While some smaller regions like Chechnya may push for independence, several key factors make a broader disintegration improbable. Most regions depend on Moscow financially. The federal government controls all major tax flows and budget allocations. Even wealthier regions rely on the center for subsidies and access to markets. Separatism is not popular. Decades of propaganda have tied national unity to survival. Most citizens see fragmentation as weakness, not freedom. The economy is interdependent. Oil in eastern Siberia needs pipelines that run through other regions. The center has most of the manufacturing. The north handles resource extraction, the south does agriculture, and the Black Sea coast hosts the resorts. Each region plays a role in the larger economic ecosystem. Individually, none of them can sustain a full military, secure borders, or fund a national infrastructure. Together, they can barely manage it. Apart, not a chance. If the new government remains hardline, Russia could resemble Iran. Isolated, sanctioned, closely tied to China, hostile to NATO. Russia will likely continue to view itself as a great power deserving special privileges. That mindset won't vanish. Whether expressed through aggression or diplomacy depends on Putin's successor. The urgent geopolitical question after Putin: what happens to the war in Ukraine? A new leader might seek a face-saving exit, reframing minimal gains as victory. This war was Putin's mistake. Now we'll secure peace. State media would spin minimal concessions as triumph, ending active hostilities. Putin's exit would trigger aftershocks across the former Soviet Union. Many post-Soviet governments define their policies in reaction to Putin. For example, Belarus under Lukashenko has effectively become a Putin client state. If Putin disappears, Lukashenko may lose his primary backer and face either pressure from a new Kremlin or growing domestic unrest. The West would cautiously welcome de-escalation, but remain skeptical. Sanctions relief would require real actions: withdrawal, peacekeepers, and reparations. Even optimistically, Russia won't become a Western ally overnight. Too much mistrust remains. Limited cooperation might resume in mutual interests, but full reconciliation would take years. Under Putin, Russia grew significantly closer to China, especially as Western ties collapsed. That trajectory is likely to continue. China is now Russia's top trade partner and a crucial lifeline amid sanctions, buying Russian energy, supplying banned technologies, and shielding Moscow diplomatically. China's key concern is stability. It doesn't want a nuclear-armed neighbor spiraling into chaos. If Russia teeters after Putin, Beijing might step in quietly with loans, investments, or infrastructure aid to shore up order and avoid mass unrest or border instability. Still, China benefits from Russia's isolation. The worse Russia's relationship with the West, the cheaper its energy and the more reliable its political support on global issues, like Taiwan. So long as Moscow isn't openly pro-Western, Beijing will likely remain flexible, adapting to whatever successor keeps Russia stable, subordinate, and dependent. What comes next? More of the same? Real reform or something entirely unexpected? Let's conclude with three radically different futures. Putin's supporters imagine Ukraine disarmed, Europe collapsing without Russia, the Baltic states disappearing, the US facing economic depression, and Russia rising at the center of a new BRICS order. I see a likely economic crisis triggered by falling resource prices, creating a historic opportunity for regime change, if the right leaders appear at the right moment. My student Slava Pilotov explores a darker vision in his short novel The Russian Gladiator, where ordinary Russians profit from the Ukrainian war, spiraling into a terrifying dystopia of drones and moral collapse.
All rise for the Honorable Judge Spez.
What do you mean not relevant to the matter? How much is Colin's mortgage overdue? Speak up, I can't hear you. 4 months? He owes you 10%, sure. You have the right, I get it. Listen, I'm asking nicely. Quit this goddamn bank and go work as a medic on the front lines. Oh, you don't want to? You won't eat 10%. You know how many friends I've buried this year? 25% of them. You've got 10% interest. I've got 25% in the ground.
Alex tried to explain that things wouldn't change unless they formed an assault battalion out of the likes of bankers, DJs, and government brats. He said he'd personally sweep through Moscow's bars and nightclubs with an assault rifle. By then, the girl had already pressed the panic button. On another camera, at the main entrance, you could see the rapid response unit arriving, armored up and ready. Those guys had seen plenty of horrors themselves. They rushed in like a pack of trained dogs. But Alex must have sensed something. He acted first. He lobbed the grenade into the hallway. That's army training for you. He dove behind the counter just in time, hands clamped over his ears.
He's a murderer.
The blast didn't even scratch him, just left him half deaf. The wildest part was Alex actually got what he wanted. After that incident, the bank backed off Kolyan's widow.
Please read Slava's story, linked below, and leave a review. In Russia, writing this risks prison, but voices like his must be heard. If this video gave you something to think about, please subscribe and share. It truly helps. You can also click join, leave a super thanks, or buy me a coffee. Your support means more than I can say. Thank you for joining this journey.